remember the first time I saw Dr. Davis. He was standing at the nurse's station, his white coat crisp, his eyes locked on a chart. But when he looked up and met my gaze, time seemed to stop. There was something in those piercing blue eyes, an intensity that made my stomach flip. I quickly turned away, fumbling with my own paperwork, but I could still feel him there, like a shadow I couldn't shake. My name's Emily, and I was 25, fresh out of nursing school, starting my first night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. I'd always been the hard-working type, eager to prove myself, to show I could handle the chaos of a busy urban hospital. During the day, this place was a whirlwind of voices, footsteps, and ringing phones. But at night, it transformed. The corridors grew quiet, the fluorescent lights dimmed to a soft hum, and the air carried that sharp sting of antiseptic mixed with stale coffee. It was eerie, but there was a strange peace to it too. Rachel, my friend who'd been here a year, was showing me around. "You'll get used to the night shift," she said, flashing a warm smile as we walked past the empty waiting area. "It's actually kind of calming once you settle in." I nodded, clutching my clipboard, trying to memorize where everything was. The supply closets, the break room, the quickest route to the ER. My nerves were buzzing, but I didn't want her to see that. Then he walked in. Dr. Mark Davis, one of the senior surgeons. Tall, with dark hair just starting to gray at the temples, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to cut through the dim light. I'd heard about him before I even started. Brilliant, respected, but distant. The kind of man who commanded a room without saying much. He moved with purpose, his steps echoing faintly down the hall as he approached the nurse's station. I was double-checking a patient's chart when he stopped beside me. "Nurse Emily, right?" His voice was deep, smooth, like it could steady your heartbeat just by listening. I glanced up, startled he knew my name already. "Yes, doctor," I managed, hoping my voice didn't betray the sudden heat creeping up my neck. He handed me the chart. "Can you update this with the latest labs?" Our fingers brushed as I took it. A fleeting touch, barely a second. But it sent a jolt through me, sharp and electric. I pulled back too fast, nearly dropping the clipboard, and he raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" he asked, a hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. "Fine," I mumbled, burying my face in the papers. The next few hours were a blur of small moments that kept pulling me back to him. He called me over to assist with a minor procedure, a patient with a dislocated shoulder who'd come in after a late-night fall. I stood across from him, passing instruments, watching his hands move with precision. They were steady, confident, and I found myself staring longer than I should have. "Good work," he said afterward, his tone casual but his eyes lingering, on me a beat too long. My cheeks burned, and I muttered a quick thank you before hurrying off to check on another patient. It wasn't just the compliments or the way he said my name. It was the little things piling up, the way he'd glance at me across the room, the way his voice softened when he asked for something. I told myself it was nothing, just a new nurse overthinking things. But then came the supply room. I'd gone in to grab more gauze, stretching up to reach a box on the top shelf, when the door creaked open. Dr. Davis stepped inside, scanning the shelves for something. "Need a hand?" he asked. And before I could answer, he was there, reaching up beside me. Our arms brushed, and for a split second, we were too close. His sleeve against my scrub top, the faint warmth of him seeping through the fabric. I froze, my breath catching, and he didn't move either. The air felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. Then he grabbed a pack of sutures, stepped back, and cleared his throat. "Sorry," he said gruffly, turning to leave. The door swung shut behind him, and I stood there, heart pounding, wondering why my hands were trembling. As the shift wound down, I was exhausted, but wired, replaying every second of that moment. Rachel found me by the coffee machine, pouring myself a cup to stay awake. "You're doing great for your first night," she said, then paused, her eyes narrowing. "Hey, I saw how you were looking at Dr. Davis earlier." Her voice dropped, serious now. "Be careful, Emily. There's a strict policy here. No relationships between staff, especially doctors and nurses. They've had issues before. It's not worth the trouble." I forced a laugh, waving it off. "What? No, it's not like that." But her words stuck, sinking into me like a warning I didn't want to hear. I knew she was right. I'd seen the employee handbook, page 47, interpersonal relationships between staff. It was crystal clear. Anything romantic, especially across the hierarchy, was forbidden. Risked warnings, transfers, even termination, if it got messy. And Dr. Davis? He wasn't just any doctor. He was married. I'd noticed the ring on his finger earlier, glinting under the lights. This wasn't just against the rules. It was a line I shouldn't even be thinking about, crossing, so why couldn't I stop? I was grabbing my bag to leave when he caught me in the hallway. The shift was over, the hospital settling into that pre-dawn stillness, and most of the staff had already clocked out. "Emily," he called, his voice low, pulling me back. I turned, and there he was, leaning against the wall, his coat off, sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, but those eyes were sharp, fixed on me. "Can you stay a bit longer? I need to talk to you about something important." My pulse raced. Important? About work? Or... I should have said no, made some excuse. My car, my roommate, anything. But instead, I nodded, clutching my bag tighter. "Of course, doctor." He gestured toward his office down the hall, and as I followed him, my mind spun. Rachel's warning echoed in my head, but so did that jolt from the supply room, that look he'd given me. Whatever this was, it was just the start. And if you want to know how deep this confession goes, you'll have to stick around for the next part. Maybe even hit that subscribe button if you're into these kinds of workplace secrets. The next night, I was assigned to assist Dr. Davis with an emergency surgery. A patient had come in with a ruptured appendix, and we had to act fast. The operating room buzzed with urgency, beeping monitors, clattering instruments, the sharp commands of the surgical team. But as soon as Dr. Davis and I locked eyes across the sterile field, everything else seemed to fade into a distant hum. We moved in, sync, a seamless rhythm born of necessity and something unspoken. At one point, our gloved hands brushed as we both reached for the retractor, and a jolt shot through me, electric and undeniable. I glanced up, catching his gaze. Those hazel eyes held an intensity that made my knees tremble beneath my scrubs. After the procedure, as we scrubbed out at the sink, he turned to me, his voice cutting through the sound of running water. "You were exceptional in there, Emily. I think you have a real gift for this." Heat crept up my neck, and I smiled, ducking my head to hide my flush. "Thank you, doctor. I learned from the best." He returned the smile, a slow curve of his lips that lingered a beat too long. For a moment, I thought he might say more, but then Rachel stormed into the scrub room, her expression as hard as the tile walls. "Emily, can I speak with you for a minute?" I nodded, following her to the break room. She shut the door with a decisive click and rounded on me, her voice low but sharp. "What's going on with you and Dr. Davis?" "Nothing," I said, the word tumbling out too fast, too defensive. Even I didn't buy it. "Emily, I'm serious. People are starting to notice. The way you two look at each other, it's not subtle. You need to be careful. This could end badly for both of you." I sighed, leaning against the counter. "I know, Rachel, but it's not what you think. We're just colleagues." She arched an eyebrow, unconvinced. Colleagues don't look at each other like that. Just promise me you'll keep it professional. You've worked too hard to throw it all away. I will, I said, but the words felt hollow. Keeping my distance from Dr. Davis was easier said than done. Later, as I gathered my things from the locker room to head home, Dr. Davis caught me in the hallway. His white coat was unbuttoned, revealing the crisp shirt beneath, and his presence filled the narrow space. "Emily, I have an opportunity for you," he said, his tone casual but his eyes intent. "I'm conducting a research study on improving surgical outcomes, and I need an assistant. It would involve working closely with me, possibly after hours. Are you interested?" My heart leaped into my throat. This was a golden ticket, a chance to boost my career, to learn from one of the hospital's top surgeons. But the subtext hung heavy between us. More time alone with him, away from prying eyes. It was a risk, and I knew it. Still, I couldn't say no. "I'd be honored," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Great. Let's meet in my office tomorrow after your shift to discuss the details." As I walked to my car, the cool night air did little to calm the storm brewing inside me. Excitement warred with dread. What was I getting myself into? I wanted to believe this was purely professional, that I could handle it, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Then, as I passed his office on my way out, I heard voices. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I saw Dr. Davis pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. "Sarah, I can't do this right now," he said, exasperation lacing his tone. "You know how demanding this job is." His wife's voice crackled through the speaker, muffled but thick with frustration. "It's not just the job, Mark. There's something else. I can feel it." My stomach twisted into knots. Was she suspecting something? Nothing had happened between us. Not really. But the guilt gnawed at me all the same. Had I crossed a line without even realizing it? I hurried away before anyone could spot me, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Driving home, my mind spun like a carousel I couldn't stop. I knew I should back out of the research project, tell him I'd changed my mind. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But the pull toward Dr. Davis was magnetic, irresistible, and that research opportunity was too good to pass up. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, torn between desire and duty. Little did I know, things were about to spiral out of control. The research project was a dream come true, or so I told myself. Dr. Davis and I spent hours together in his office, poring over data, discussing methodologies, and drafting proposals. The work was challenging, but it was the kind of challenge I thrived on. What I didn't anticipate was how the late nights would blur the lines between professional and personal, how the quiet intimacy of his office would make the air between us feel charged, electric. One evening, as we reviewed a stack of patient charts, our hands brushed accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally. I felt a spark, a jolt that traveled up my arm and settled in my chest. I glanced up, and there it was again, that intense gaze, his hazel eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. Then, he cleared his throat and looked away, breaking the spell. "Let's take a break," he said, his voice huskier than usual. "I'll grab us some coffee." As he left the room, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart pounded against my ribs, and I tried to steady myself. This was getting dangerous. I knew it, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. When he returned, he handed me a cup, his fingers grazing mine. "Emily," he began, his tone serious, "I want you to know how much I appreciate your dedication to this project. You're something special." I smiled, warmth spreading through me. "Thank you, Doctor. That means a lot coming from you." He hesitated, then added, Mark. You can call me Mark when we're alone. My breath caught. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, like a door opening to a room I wasn't sure I should enter. Mark, I repeated softly, testing the name on my tongue. It felt intimate, forbidden. Just then, the door swung open, and Rachel stepped in, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Emily, can I talk to you for a second? Her voice was tight, clipped. I nodded, excusing myself and following her into the hallway. As soon as we were out of earshot, she rounded on me. What the hell is going on in there? Nothing, I said, but even I didn't believe it anymore. Emily, I'm not blind. The way you two look at each other, the late nights, it's obvious something's happening. You need to stop this before it's too late. I felt a surge of defensiveness. We're just working on the research project. It's professional. Rachel scoffed. Professional? Please. I've seen the way he looks at you, and you're not exactly hiding your feelings either. This is a hospital, Emily. People talk. If this gets out, it could ruin both of your careers. Her words hit me like a bucket of ice water. She was right, of course. But the thought of pulling, away from Mark, Dr. Davis, felt like tearing off a piece of myself. I'll be careful, I promised, though I wasn't sure how. Later that night, as we wrapped up our work, Mark leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Emily, there's something I need to tell you, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I looked up, startled by the change in his tone. What is it? He sighed, his eyes distant. My marriage? It's not what it seems. Sarah and I, we've been drifting apart for years. We're more like roommates than husband and wife. I've tried to make it work, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. My heart ached for him. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but I knew that would be crossing a line we couldn't uncross. I'm sorry, I said softly. That must be incredibly hard. He nodded, his gaze meeting mine. It is. But being here with you, it's the first time in a long while that I've felt truly alive. The air between us crackled with tension. I could feel the pull, the magnetic force drawing me closer to him. Our faces were inches apart, and I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw. My breath hitched as he leaned in, his lips parting slightly. Just then, a sharp knock on the door shattered the moment. We sprang apart, my heart racing. Mark cleared his throat and called out, "Come in." The door opened, and Dr. Thompson, the chief of surgery, stepped inside. His eyes flicked between us, a frown creasing his brow. Dr. Davis, Nurse Emily, I need to speak with you both. Now. My stomach dropped. This couldn't be good. The air in Dr. Davis's office grew heavy as Dr. Thompson's stern gaze pinned us in place. I've heard rumors, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Rumors about the two of you. The hospital has a strict policy against workplace relationships, especially between doctors and nurses. This isn't just about rules, it's about professionalism and the reputation of this institution. My heart sank, and heat rushed to my cheeks. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. Before I could find words, Mark stepped forward, his jaw set. Dr. Thompson, this is on me. Emily's done nothing wrong. She's an outstanding nurse, and I won't let her career suffer for my mistakes. Dr. Thompson's eyes narrowed. Your mistakes, Dr. Davis, could cost you both dearly, and this hospital too. Fix this, or I will. He turned and left, the door's soft click echoing like a gavel. Alone again, I faced Mark, my pulse racing. What do we do now? I whispered. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes searching mine. I don't know, Emily, but I can't pretend I don't feel something for you. These past few weeks, they've changed everything for me. Tears stung my eyes. I feel it too, Mark. But this can't work. You're married, and we've got our careers to think about. Maybe we should end it here. He shook his head, stepping closer. I can't walk away from us. My marriage to Sarah, it's been a shell for years. We stay together for the kids, for appearances. But with you, I feel alive again. His words stirred something deep within me, but doubt clawed at my resolve. Even if you leave her, there's still the hospital. If anyone finds out, it could ruin us. He reached out, his hand brushing my cheek. I'd risk it all for you. Before I could answer, the door flew open. Rachel, my closest friend among the nurses, stood there, her face pale. Emily, you need to see this. She handed me a crumpled email printout. As I read, my stomach twisted. Sarah, Mark's wife, was having an affair. The words were raw, undeniable. I handed it to Mark, watching his face crumple as he absorbed the truth. Where did this come from? He asked, his voice breaking. Rachel hesitated. It was left on the printer in the break room. I didn't mean to snoop, but you deserve to know. Mark crushed the paper in his fist. I've suspected for months, but I can't ignore it anymore. I'm so sorry, I said, touching his arm. He met my gaze, his eyes blazing with resolve. I'm done with her. This ends now. Days later, Mark told me he and Sarah were separating. He'd moved out, and divorce papers were in motion. With Sarah out of the picture, we could be together. But the hospital's rules still loomed. We kept our relationship hidden, stealing moments in empty rooms and quiet corners. It was exhilarating, yet the secrecy gnawed at me. One night, in the dim light of an on-call room, Mark held me close. I love you, Emily. I'm tired of hiding. I want us to be real. I pressed my forehead to his chest. I love you too, but we can't. Not yet. We need time. He nodded, but I saw the strain in his eyes. I know. It's just hard. Weeks passed, each secret meeting tightening the bond between us. But the pressure of hiding wore me down. I flinched at every sound, terrified of discovery. Then, disaster struck. We were in Mark's office, lost in each other, when Dr. Thompson burst in. I warned you, he snapped, his voice icy. This ends now. We pulled apart, shame burning through me. Dr. Thompson's glare was unrelenting. Dr. Davis, you're suspended pending investigation. Nurse Emily, you're on probation. Cooperate fully, or it's over for both of you. The investigation was brutal. Our private moments were dissected, our reputations shredded. Whispers followed me through the halls, and the hospital's warmth turned cold. In the end, Mark resigned, taking a job at a distant hospital to escape the fallout. I kept my position, but I was no longer the bright new nurse, just the one who'd crossed the line. On his last day, we met in the parking lot. He took my hands, his eyes heavy with regret. I'm so sorry, Emily. I never meant for this. Tears fell as I shook my head. We both chose this. But maybe it's better this way. We need to heal. He pulled me into a fierce hug. I'll never forget you. You've changed me forever. Watching him drive away broke something in me. But it also set me free. The future was uncertain, but I had to rebuild. Looking back, I see our love was a mistake and a lesson. It taught me the cost of crossing boundaries, the sting of betrayal, and the courage to start anew. I don't regret loving Mark, but I regret the pain we caused. Now, I'm focused on my career, determined to be the nurse I know I can be. One day, I might find love again. Honest, unshaded love. Thanks for hearing my story. Have you ever faced a choice like mine? Would you risk everything for love or protect what you've built? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more workplace confessions.